The blizzard and the mysterious stranger. The wind howled like a wild beast outside, rattling the small wooden hut in the middle of the frozen wilderness. Thick snow piled up against the walls, and the air was filled with an endless white storm. Inside, a man named Ethan Carter sat by the crackling fire, his rough hands wrapped around a tin cup of warm tea. He was used to the cold, used to the silence. For the past 3 years, Ethan had lived alone in this remote land. He had chosen isolation after losing everything: his family, his job, his trust in people. The world had betrayed him, and he no longer wished to be part of it. But that night, something unexpected happened. A loud knock echoed through the hut, barely audible over the storm. Ethan froze. No one came here. The nearest town was over 50 miles away. Who could be out in this deadly blizzard? Another desperate pounding followed, weaker this time. Someone was out there, fighting to survive. Ethan stood up, hesitating for a moment. He was a man who had learned to be cautious. In a world full of dangers, trusting the wrong person could mean death. But he could not ignore someone in need. He grabbed his rifle, just in case, and slowly unlatched the heavy wooden door. The wind immediately rushed inside, freezing air biting at his skin. And there she was, a woman wrapped in tattered silver fabric, half buried in the snow. Her long, dark hair was covered in frost, and her skin had an unnatural pale glow. She shivered violently, barely able to stand. Her large, luminous eyes locked onto his, filled with something strange. Fear. She stumbled forward, her legs giving out. Ethan barely caught her before she collapsed onto the wooden floor of the hut. He quickly shut the door, sealing them from the brutal storm outside. He dragged her toward the fire, placing her near the warmth. Her breathing was ragged, her lips slightly blue. "Hey," he said, shaking her lightly. "Can you hear me?" The woman flinched, eyes darting around in terror. She pressed herself against the wooden floor as if trying to get away from him. Ethan raised his hands. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." She did not speak, but her breath quickened, and her hands trembled. She watched him as if he were some kind of monster. Ethan sighed. She was afraid of him. But why? He reached for a blanket, wrapping it around her fragile frame. "You need warmth, or you'll freeze to death." She stared at him, her gaze filled with uncertainty. Then, ever so slowly, she pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "Good," Ethan muttered. He moved to the small stove, pouring a cup of hot water. He placed it near her, but did not force her to take it. He had seen fear like this before. Fear of people, fear of what they could do. He did not know what this woman had been through, but he knew one thing. She was running from something. Minutes passed. The wind continued to roar outside, but inside, the silence between them was heavy. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, unfamiliar, her accent strange. "You are human." Ethan frowned. "Of course, I am." The woman's hands tightened around the blanket, her expression filled with something he couldn't understand. Then, in a whisper, she said, "You are one of them." Ethan's stomach twisted. One of them. Before he could ask what she meant, the woman's body went limp. She had lost consciousness. Ethan stared at her, confusion and unease settling in his chest. Who was she? Why was she afraid of him? And most importantly, what was she running from? Outside, in the heart of the raging blizzard, something moved through the snow, its shadow barely visible in the darkness. The hunt was not over yet. "She's not human." Ethan sat beside the unconscious woman, watching the fire flicker across her pale skin. His cabin was small, barely more than a single room with a bed, a wood stove, and a few shelves stacked with canned food. He had lived here alone for years, but tonight everything had changed. The blizzard outside continued its relentless assault, snow piling higher against the windows. Yet despite the howling wind, Ethan couldn't shake an uneasy feeling, as if something else lurked in the storm, watching. His eyes drifted back to the woman. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin had a faint glow, almost like the moonlight reflecting off fresh snow. Her hair shimmered slightly as if it held traces of silver beneath the black strands. Even her breathing was unusual, too slow, too controlled. And then there were her eyes. When she had briefly opened them before fainting, they had been larger than normal, with irises that weren't quite human. But what disturbed Ethan most was the fear he had seen in them. Not fear of the storm, not fear of dying, but fear of him. "You are one of them." Her words echoed in his mind. Who did she think he was? Ethan sighed and rubbed his temples. He had no answers, only questions. But one thing was clear. She was running from something. And whatever it wasn't natural. Suddenly, she stirred. A soft gasp escaped her lips as she bolted upright, her body tense, her eyes wide with panic. She scanned the room quickly, then her gaze landed on Ethan. She scrambled back against the wall, her entire body trembling. "Easy," Ethan said, raising his hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes. She pressed herself against the wooden wall, breathing heavily, as if trying to convince herself she was still alive. "You took me in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded. "You were half frozen outside. You would have died if I left you there." She swallowed hard, her gaze flickering between him and the door. She was still deciding whether she should trust him or run. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice calm. "What were you doing out there?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, with clear hesitation, she whispered, I do not belong here." Ethan frowned. "Where do you belong?" Her lips parted as if she wanted to answer, but then she shook her head. "I cannot tell you. It is not safe." Ethan sighed. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but I'm not your enemy. I helped you. The least you can do is tell me the truth." She hesitated again, her fingers gripping the blanket tightly. Then, finally, she whispered, "I am not human." Ethan stared at her. The fire crackled in the silence. "Not human," he repeated. She slowly pulled her hand from beneath the blanket and held it up. In the dim light, Ethan saw something that made his breath catch. Her fingers shifted, the skin flickering like a hologram, revealing something metallic beneath. Ethan instinctively reached for his knife, but she quickly covered her hand again, her eyes filled with desperation. "Please," she begged, "do not be afraid." Ethan forced himself to stay calm, even though his heart pounded in his chest. "You're an alien?" he asked, barely believing his own words. She nodded. "I come from a place far beyond this world." Ethan exhaled slowly. He had always believed in the possibility of extraterrestrial life, but seeing it with his own eyes was different. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice quieter now. She looked toward the window, where the wind howled against the glass. "I was taken. My ship was destroyed. I escaped, but they are still hunting me." Ethan stiffened. "Who?" Her expression darkened. "Men. But not like you. They work for a greater power. They take people like me and experiment on them." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "Wait," he said. "You mean humans are hunting you?" She nodded slowly. "Not normal humans. Enhanced ones. Modified. They serve something powerful, something hidden." Ethan clenched his jaw. He had spent years trying to escape from the corruption of the world, but now it had come right to his doorstep. Suddenly, a strange beeping sound filled the air. The woman's face turned pale. She reached under her clothing and pulled out a small glowing device. A red light blinked rapidly. "They have found me," she whispered in horror. Ethan jumped to his feet, grabbing his rifle. "What do you mean?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with dread. "They are here." At that moment, a loud thud came from outside. Then another. Footsteps. Ethan's grip tightened around his rifle. He moved toward the window, carefully peering through the frosted glass. In the swirling snow, dark figures moved through the storm, their silhouettes barely visible. Then one of them lifted a glowing device, and a faint blue light scanned the cabin. Ethan barely had time to react before a metallic voice echoed through the storm. Target acquired. Surround the structure. No survivors. The woman gasped, and Ethan's blood ran cold. His quiet life in the wilderness had just turned into a nightmare. A secret war and a hidden truth. The air inside the cabin felt heavier than the storm raging outside. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he gripped his rifle. His eyes flickered toward the woman, or whatever she was, who sat frozen, staring at the blinking red light in her hand. Outside, the crunching of boots against the snow grew louder. They were closing in. How many? Ethan whispered, moving swiftly to extinguish the lantern by the window. The fire still flickered, but it was low enough not to cast shadows on the frosted glass. The woman's fingers trembled as she pressed the side of the device, revealing a holographic display. Ethan's eyes widened. He had never seen technology like this before. The screen showed 6 figures moving through the storm, each glowing red, like predators closing in on their prey. "They will not stop," she murmured, her voice almost robotic. "They are enhanced, stronger than humans, faster. They will take me, and they will kill you." Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened. He wasn't a soldier, but he had been a survivor all his life. He wasn't about to let some cybernetic freaks waltz into his home and drag this woman away. Not when he still didn't know what the hell was going on. "Who are they?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The woman turned her glowing blue eyes toward him, fear evident in their depths. "They are called the Harvesters." Ethan frowned. "Harvesters? Never heard of them." She exhaled shakily. "You would not have. They exist in the shadows. They do not answer to your governments. They work for something greater, something not from this world." A loud thud shook the walls of the cabin. They were at the door. Ethan gestured for her to move behind the wooden table as he raised his rifle. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. Survive. That's all that mattered now. The woman grabbed his arm suddenly. "You cannot fight them," she whispered. "They will not die like your kind. You must run." Ethan grit his teeth. "Not an option. This is my home. I don't run." She looked at him with something strange in her expression, like she couldn't believe what he was saying. Another bang at the door. The wood splintered. And then the voice came. Alien life form detected. A deep, distorted voice echoed from the other side. "You are in violation of Protocol X9. Surrender immediately." Ethan glanced at the woman, but she shook her head violently. "If they take me," she whispered, "I will not be seen again. And neither will you." Ethan turned back to the door, mind racing. He had 2 options, fight or escape. A sharp metallic click sounded outside. They were unlocking the door remotely. Ethan moved fast. He grabbed the woman's wrist and yanked her toward the back of the cabin, where a hidden hatch led to the underground supply tunnel. "We go now," he said. "No arguments." She nodded, trusting him. The door burst open just as they slipped into the tunnel, the sound of mechanized footsteps filling the cabin above them. Ethan led the way through the narrow passage, the woman close behind. The air was cold and damp, but at least they weren't dead yet. As they crawled through the dark tunnel, the woman finally spoke. "You are different," she murmured. Ethan gave her a side glance. "How so?" She hesitated. "Most humans, they give up. They are weak. But you are willing to stand against them. Why?" Ethan sighed. "Because I don't trust anyone who breaks into my house with guns and demands surrender." The woman stared at him for a long moment. Then, finally, she whispered, "Perhaps you are not one of them after all." Ethan stiffened at her words. One of them. She had called him that before, and something in the way she said it sent an uneasy chill down his spine. The truth beneath the surface. They emerged from the tunnel into the deep, frozen wilderness. The storm still howled, covering their tracks as they hurried toward the forest. Ethan kept his rifle ready. He had grown up in these woods, hunting for food, surviving against the odds. If the harvesters wanted to track them, they would have to work for it. The woman moved silently beside him, but Ethan could tell she was growing weaker. Whatever strength she had left was fading fast. "We need to get to shelter," he said, scanning the area for any safe spot. She shook her head. "Shelter will not save us. We need to keep moving." Ethan frowned. "And go where?" The woman hesitated. Then, reluctantly, she raised her hand and pressed her fingers to a small silver device embedded in her wrist. A holographic map flickered to life. Ethan's breath caught. The map showed something impossible, a hidden facility buried deep beneath the ice, miles from their current location. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. She looked at him with haunted eyes. "The place where I was kept." Ethan felt his stomach twist. "And you want to go back there?" She nodded. "There is something inside, something they fear. If I can reach it, I may have a way to stop them." Ethan clenched his jaw. Every part of him screamed that this was a suicide mission, but something told him that if they ran now, the harvesters would never stop hunting them. He looked at the woman, her face pale but determined. He exhaled. "Fine. But if this goes south, we do things my way." She nodded, and then, far in the distance, a blue light pierced through the storm. Searchlights, sweeping the forest. The hunt was still on. And this time, there would be no more running. The hunters have arrived. The storm had begun to settle, but Ethan knew that was not a good sign. The howling winds had masked their escape, covering their tracks in the snow. But now, with the blizzard easing, the hunt would begin in full force. The woman, the alien fugitive, walked beside him, shivering under the weight of exhaustion. The soft glow of her skin had dimmed, and her movements were slow. Whatever energy she had left was fading fast. Ethan kept his rifle raised, scanning the snow-covered trees around them. He had spent years surviving in this wilderness. But tonight, he was not the predator. He was the prey. And they were coming. In the distance, blue searchlights swept across the frozen landscape, their beams cutting through the trees like knives. The harvesters. They moved in complete silence, their black silhouettes barely visible against the ice and snow. Ethan counted at least 6 of them, tall, unnaturally still, their bodies enhanced with cybernetic implants. They didn't move like humans. They moved too precisely, too mechanically. The woman stumbled, nearly falling. Ethan caught her, steadying her. "You okay?" he whispered. She nodded weakly. "We need to move faster." Ethan scanned their surroundings. There was nowhere to hide. Just an endless stretch of white, dotted with skeletal trees. He had grown up hunting deer in these woods, and he knew one thing. If you had nowhere to hide, you had to become invisible. "We need to throw them off," he said. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though barely. Ethan made a decision. He grabbed a handful of dry branches and snapped them, scattering them in different directions. Then he pulled off his coat, tossing it toward a nearby tree. "If they're tracking heat signatures, that'll buy us a few minutes," he muttered. The woman watched him with something like admiration. "You think like a soldier." Ethan shook his head. "No, just a man who's been running his whole life." She stared at him for a moment before speaking. "Then you understand why I cannot stop running either." Ethan wanted to ask her what exactly she had done to make them hunt her, but there was no time. The blue searchlights were getting closer. He grabbed her wrist. "Let's move." The first kill. They ran, silent, swift, disappearing into the white abyss. Ethan led them through an uneven terrain where jagged rocks jutted out from the ice. He knew this land better than anyone. If they could reach the caves near the ravine, they would have a real chance to escape. But luck was not on their side. A sharp, metallic click echoed through the frozen air. Ethan barely had time to react before a harpoon-like projectile shot past them, missing his head by inches. They had been spotted. The woman let out a gasp as one of the harvesters emerged from the trees, his eyes glowing a dull orange, his body wrapped in sleek, black armor. The figure moved unnaturally fast, covering the snow like a shadow with no weight, no wasted movement, no hesitation. Ethan raised his rifle and fired. A perfect shot, right between the eyes. But the harvester didn't even flinch. Instead, the bullet stopped midair, suspended just inches from his forehead. Ethan's heart dropped. What the hell? The harvester tilted its head, as if amused. Then, with a flick of his fingers, the bullet spun in the air and fired back at Ethan. Ethan ducked just in time, the bullet grazing past his shoulder. The woman grabbed his arm. Run. But Ethan wasn't running anymore. He had spent too long hiding, too long living in fear. He had lost everything once before, and he wasn't about to let that happen again. His mind worked fast. If bullets wouldn't work, then he needed a new strategy. His eyes locked onto the icicles hanging from a ledge above them. Ethan raised his rifle, not to fire at the harvester, but at the ledge. Bang! The gunshot echoed through the night, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, crack! A split second later, a massive sheet of ice broke free, tumbling down directly onto the harvester. The impact was instantaneous. The harvester was crushed beneath the weight of the ice, buried in an avalanche of frozen death. Silence. Ethan exhaled, his breath forming mist in the air. The woman stared at him, her expression unreadable. You killed it. Ethan shrugged. Guess they're not invincible after all. She shook her head. No, you do not understand. No human has ever killed a harvester before. Ethan frowned. Then maybe they haven't met the right kind of human. The betrayal. Before they could celebrate their small victory, the woman suddenly froze, her head snapping to the side. They're coming, she whispered. Ethan turned. The searchlights were now sweeping faster. They had heard the gunshot. The others would be here any second. We need to go, he said. But she didn't move. Her expression had changed, from fear to something else, something darker. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, Ethan, why do they know your name? Ethan felt his blood turn to ice. What? She stepped back, her gaze locked on something behind him. Slowly, Ethan turned. A figure stood in the distance, just beyond the reach of the searchlights. Not a harvester, not one of them. It was a man. A man Ethan recognized. And the moment he saw him, he understood the truth. He had been set up. It's been a long time, Carter, the man said, stepping closer. His voice was smooth, calm, too calm. The woman's grip tightened on Ethan's sleeve. You were one of them all along, she whispered, her voice breaking. Ethan's world spun. No, this wasn't possible. He wasn't one of them. He wasn't. But the look in her eyes told him one thing. She no longer trusted him. And maybe, just maybe, she was right not to. The great escape. The wind had died down, leaving only silence. A dangerous, suffocating silence. Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened as he stared at the figure approaching them through the snow. The man was tall, wrapped in a dark coat, his face half hidden by the shadows. But Ethan knew him. Commander Lucius Wren. A ghost from Ethan's past. A name he had buried long ago. The woman beside him took a step back. Her glowing blue eyes flickered with panic. You know him, she whispered, accusation laced in her voice. Ethan didn't answer. Because, deep down, he wasn't sure of the answer himself. The truth unveiled. Lucius Wren stopped a few feet away, studying Ethan with a smirk. The harvesters had surrounded them, their red mechanical eyes glowing in the darkness. Their movements were precise, unnatural, just like before. But they did not attack. Not yet. Lucius sighed, shaking his head. Carter, you always were a difficult one. I never expected you to live this long out here. Ethan's voice was cold. I didn't expect to see your face again either. Lucius chuckled. We both have surprises, then. The woman's breathing was shaky. Her hands trembled as she looked between them. She had trusted Ethan, but now she wasn't so sure. You worked with them? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan clenched his jaw. I don't know what you're talking about. Lucius sighed. He doesn't remember, dear. The woman froze. Ethan felt something cold crawl up his spine. What? He asked. Lucius took another step forward. You've been living out here for what? 3 years now. Do you ever wonder why? Do you ever wonder what you were running from? Ethan didn't answer. Because the truth was, he didn't remember. He remembered pain. He remembered a blurry past filled with betrayal, filled with people who had abandoned him. He remembered running, hiding. But the details, they were hazy. Lucius smiled. You were one of us, Ethan. A perfect subject, enhanced, but still, human enough to blend in. Ethan felt the woman's gaze burning into him. He shook his head. You're lying. Lucius smirked. Am I? Then he lifted a small black device from his coat pocket and pressed a button. Pain exploded through Ethan's skull. His vision blurred. His body collapsed to his knees, hands clutching his head as a sharp, electric pain shot through his mind. And then, the memories came. A facility. A cold, metal table. Wires. Needles. Machines that hummed in the darkness. Screams. And then, his own face reflected in a glass window, but different. Stronger. Faster. Enhanced. Just like the harvesters. Ethan gasped, eyes wide, breath ragged. His heart pounded against his ribs. Lucius crouched beside him, voice calm, almost fatherly. You were part of Project HFY, Carter. A hybrid experiment. Stronger than humans, but not fully machine. You were one of the best. Ethan felt sick. No, he whispered. Lucius smiled. Yes. The woman took another step back. He's like you. Lucius shrugged. Not entirely. He was a failed subject. Too independent. Too human. So we wiped his memories and let him run. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He had spent years running from them. And all this time, he had been one of them. The choice. Lucius stood up. We don't have to fight, Carter. Come back with us. Let us finish what we started. You could be more than this. Ethan stared at him. For the first time in years, he had an answer to the question that had haunted him. Who was he? But it wasn't the answer he wanted. The woman watched him carefully, waiting for his response. Ethan looked at his hands. They weren't shaking. They weren't weak. He had survived alone for 3 years. He had fought, hunted, learned to live in the wild. He had built himself without them. Ethan gritted his teeth. Then he looked at Lucius and said, Go to hell. Lucius sighed, disappointed. Wrong answer. He raised his hand, and the harvesters lunged forward. Ethan moved faster than he had ever moved before. A pistol appeared in Lucius's hand, but before he could fire, Ethan was already moving. Years of instinct kicked in. Bang. Bang. 2 precise shots took down the first harvester. The woman's hands lit up with an energy pulse, sending another crashing into the ice. But they were outnumbered. Ethan grabbed her wrist. Run. They bolted into the forest, their feet crunching against the snow. The harvesters followed, moving in eerie silence, their glowing eyes locking onto them through the darkness. Ethan's heart pounded. They wouldn't outrun them forever. Then he saw it, the cliff's edge, a deadly drop. Nothing but ice and fog below. No way down. Ethan turned. The harvesters were closing in. Lucius stood behind them, smirking. "It's over, Carter," Lucius called. "No more running." Ethan looked at the woman. She knew what he was thinking. Her breath was unsteady. "That's suicide." Ethan smirked. "Maybe." The harvesters raised their weapons. Ethan grabbed her hand. And then they jumped. The world vanished into white. And then darkness. The betrayal. The fall seemed endless. Ethan felt the cold wind rip through his skin as he and the woman plunged into the unknown. Snow, ice, and darkness swirled around them. His mind screamed for survival, but there was nothing to grab, nothing to hold, just the abyss pulling them down. Then, impact. The world exploded into pain as Ethan crashed onto a slope of soft, powdery snow, tumbling violently down a steep incline. The force knocked the air from his lungs, and for a terrifying moment, he was spinning, rolling, unable to tell up from down. Then, suddenly, silence. Ethan lay still, gasping for breath. His body ached, but nothing felt broken. The snow had softened the fall. A few feet away, the woman groaned, struggling to sit up. Ethan dragged himself upright. His hands burned from the friction of the fall, and his head was still spinning. But they were alive. For now, above them, the cliff loomed high and jagged, a near vertical drop from where they had jumped. There was no way back up. The harvesters would have to find another way down if they wanted to follow. If they survived the fall at all. The woman coughed, her breath heavy. That was reckless. Ethan smirked. "Yeah, but we're not dead, are we?" She didn't answer, just shook her head. Then, with great effort, she pushed herself up, her gaze sweeping across the icy canyon they had landed in. Ethan followed her gaze. Massive walls of ice rose around them, creating a frozen labyrinth, stretching far into the distance. A deep, jagged ravine split the land ahead, and buried beneath layers of snow and ice, half hidden in the darkness, was something unnatural. A structure. Metal. Not human-made. Ethan's gut twisted. He knew immediately. This was no ordinary place. The woman took a shaky breath. "We are close." Ethan turned to her. "Close to what?" She hesitated. Then, finally, she whispered, "The place where I was created. The hidden facility." They moved quickly, knowing the harvesters wouldn't take long to track them. The deeper they went into the canyon, the clearer the truth became. The metal beneath the ice wasn't wreckage, it was a facility. A massive abandoned structure, buried under centuries of ice. Strange symbols lined the metal walls, their meaning unknown. Lights flickered faintly, running on what little power remained. Ethan ran his fingers over the cold steel. This wasn't human technology. "This place," he murmured. "How long has it been here?" The woman swallowed hard. "Long before your kind ever walked this planet." Ethan shot her a sharp look. "So you're saying this is alien?" She nodded. "Not just alien. Forbidden." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" She hesitated, then spoke, her voice haunted. "This is where the first experiments began. Before the harvesters, before the war, before I was made." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Made." She exhaled shakily. "I was not born in the way you think. I was created, here, in this facility, long ago. My kind, we are not supposed to exist." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, trying to process it all. "So that's why they want you. Because you're some kind of, what? A failed project." She clenched her jaw. "Not failed. Dangerous." Ethan frowned. "Why?" Her gaze darkened. "Because I remember things I should not. I know secrets that can destroy them." Ethan exhaled. "Great. So we're standing in a frozen graveyard full of secrets, while a kill squad is hunting us down. Perfect." The woman placed a hand on one of the ancient consoles, brushing away the frost. A holographic interface flickered to life, glowing a faint blue. Ethan tensed. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. She was focused, her fingers moving over the screen. Strange symbols flashed rapidly, as if searching for something. Then suddenly, a door hissed open nearby, revealing a dark corridor. The woman's breath caught. It's still active. Ethan didn't like this. Not one bit. What exactly are we looking for? She turned to him, her expression deadly serious. A weapon. Ethan stiffened. What kind of weapon? She exhaled. The only thing that can kill the harvesters. The betrayal. They stepped inside, the door sealing behind them with a heavy clang. Inside, the walls were lined with strange containers, filled with preserved organic matter, floating in some kind of thick blue liquid. Ethan's stomach churned. What the hell is this place? The woman didn't answer. She knew, but she didn't want to say it. They reached a large circular chamber, where a single containment pod stood in the center. It was old, cracked, but still faintly glowing. Inside, something was frozen in ice. Something humanoid. The woman took a deep breath. This is what I came for. Ethan stared at the frozen figure. What is it? She pressed a hand to the glass. A prototype. The first of my kind. Ethan stepped back. You mean another you? She nodded. But different. More advanced. Stronger. It was the only one they could not control. Ethan's stomach twisted. And you think waking this thing up is a good idea? Before she could answer, the door behind them burst open. Lucius Wren walked in, flanked by 2 harvesters. Ethan barely had time to react before Lucius raised his hand, and suddenly, Ethan couldn't move. A sharp pain exploded in his head, his muscles locking up. His vision blurred. The woman gasped. No. Lucius smiled, stepping closer. I told you, Carter. You were one of us. And you still are. Ethan gritted his teeth, fighting the pain. Go to hell. Lucius sighed. I gave you a choice. You refused. Now you will watch as I end this rebellion before it begins. He turned toward the woman. And as for you, your little game is over. She backed away, her glowing eyes filled with defiance. You will never stop us, she hissed. Lucius smirked. Oh, I think I will. He raised a gun and fired. The shot echoed through the chamber. And Ethan watched in horror as the woman collapsed to the floor, blood staining the ice beneath her. Lucius lowered his gun. Then he turned to Ethan, his voice cold. Your turn. Ethan could only watch as everything faded to black. The final stand, and a new beginning. Ethan's world swam in darkness. Pain, deep, searing pain. His body felt like it was being torn apart from the inside. His mind was foggy, his limbs numb. He tried to move, but something held him down, a force stronger than anything he had ever felt before. Lucius Wren's voice echoed in the cold chamber. Do you feel it, Carter? That's the real you waking up. Ethan gritted his teeth, fighting the invisible grip on his body. He could hear the faint, labored breaths of the woman nearby, her lifeblood staining the ice beneath her. She was dying. He had failed her. Lucius walked closer, boots clicking against the metal floor. I told you, you were never just human. The moment we made you, you belonged to us. Ethan forced his eyes open. His vision was blurred, but he could see the outline of Lucius, standing tall, flanked by the glowing red eyes of the harvesters. His blood boiled. He wanted to rip Lucius apart. Something deep inside him, something buried, something suppressed for years, stirred. A long-lost memory whispered in his mind. A voice. You are more than what they made you. And then, the pain snapped. A white-hot surge of power coursed through Ethan's veins. His mind cleared. His body stopped shaking. Lucius noticed. His smug expression faltered. What? Ethan moved. With inhuman speed, he broke free from the invisible force holding him down. The sudden movement sent a shockwave through the air, causing the nearby consoles to flicker. The harvesters stepped forward, but Ethan was already on them. One punch, the impact sent a harvester flying into the wall. its metal frame denting upon impact. Another lunged, but Ethan was faster, stronger. He grabbed its wrist and twisted. A sickening crunch echoed as the harvester's arm was torn from its socket. Lucius staggered back, eyes wide. "That's impossible." Ethan turned to face him. His breath was steady, controlled. His body felt different, lighter, sharper, stronger. Lucius had unlocked something within him, but not the way he intended. Ethan wasn't theirs anymore. He was his own. Revenge and rebellion. Lucius raised his gun, aiming for Ethan's head. Ethan moved before he could fire. In a blink, he was in front of Lucius, grabbing his wrist and twisting the gun away. The shot fired wildly into the ceiling, sending sparks raining down. Lucius gasped in pain as Ethan tightened his grip. "You think you own me?" Ethan growled. "You think I belong to you?" Lucius gritted his teeth, trying to push back, but he was nothing compared to Ethan now. Ethan pulled him close, voice cold as the ice beneath them. "You made a mistake, Lucius. You woke up the wrong man." And then, with a single strike to the chest, Ethan sent Lucius crashing against the wall. Lucius coughed, blood dripping from his lips. He tried to stand, but Ethan was already on him, grabbing him by the collar. "You lied to me," Ethan snarled. "You erased my memories. You made me a fugitive in my own skin." Lucius wheezed. "You were always one of us." Ethan's grip tightened. "Not anymore." Lucius tried to laugh, but it came out weak. "It doesn't matter. You think you're free. You'll never be free. The ones above me, the real ones in charge, they will come for you." Ethan didn't flinch. "Then let them come." And with that, he threw Lucius to the ground, knocking him unconscious. He turned toward the woman. She was barely breathing now, her skin too pale, her body too weak. Ethan's chest tightened. He had to do something. Then his eyes landed on the cryogenic pod in the center of the room. The prototype. The first of her kind. Ethan hesitated only for a second. Then he moved to the control panel. The woman weakly lifted her head. "What are you doing?" Ethan punched in the activation code. The containment pod hissed. Ice cracked. And then, the being inside opened its eyes. A soft, eerie blue glow emanated from within. The figure inside, taller, sleeker, stronger than the woman, stepped forward. It looked at Ethan, then at the woman. Then, in a voice far too familiar, it spoke. "Who woke me?" The woman gasped. "Brother." Ethan stepped back. The prototype locked eyes with him, studying him. Then, with a knowing nod, it turned toward the fallen Lucius and the harvesters. A slow smirk crossed its lips. Time to burn it all down. A new beginning. They walked away from the flaming ruins of the facility. The battle had been short, brutal. The prototype had destroyed the remaining harvesters with terrifying ease. Lucius, gone. Whether he was dead or not didn't matter. He had lost. Now, the real war was about to begin. Ethan looked at the woman. Her wounds were healing faster now, thanks to whatever strange connection she had with the prototype. She turned to Ethan. "What happens now?" Ethan exhaled, watching the sunrise over the frozen wasteland. "For the first time," he said, "I have a choice." She nodded. "And what will you choose?" Ethan smirked. "To fight." The woman smiled softly. "Then you are not one of them after all." Ethan looked toward the sky, where a single, distant star twinkled. A ship, perhaps. Watching. Waiting. The real war hadn't started yet. But when it did, he would be ready. And this time, he wouldn't be running. He would be the hunter.